speaker tonight is Jill Prohaska. Yes. She is currently a student at the Dallas Theological Seminary, and she's getting a degree in Christian education. Prior to that, she was a writer for Hope for the Heart organization. She's currently with Poiema, which is the Foundation for Human Trafficking Prevention and Resource Center, and she's been there about a year, right? And so at this point, I'd like to introduce Jill and have her talk.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you for this opportunity to be with y'all this evening. Appreciate y'all coming out. Obviously, this is a very, very challenging topic to address and to focus on. But yet, as the body of Christ, we have to look at it from two sides of the coin. What's going on? We need to be aware about what's going on around the world, around our state, in the Metroplex, and in Flower Mound. But also, what is God calling us to do to battle this very, very dark industry that's going on all around us? So I appreciate y'all being here to want to learn, because it all begins with awareness. We need to know what's going on, how to recognize it, and what God is calling us to do to minister on His behalf. And just like your pastor said, God's all about taking broken things and making them whole again. Our God is redemptive. It's awesome. So there's no lost causes in this arena or genre. Again, my name is Jill Prohaska. Rebecca Jowers is our executive director of Poiema, which was founded about 5 years ago. We're a faith-based nonprofit involved in fighting human trafficking. Poiema, you might wonder, that's kind of an interesting word. It's a Greek word, and it's based on Ephesians 2:10, which is, for we are His workmanship, or masterpiece, or handiwork, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we would walk in them. So Poiema is a Greek word for workmanship or masterpiece. Poiema, we're involved in fighting human trafficking in a number of different ways. We have information at our back table that is available to you as the Lord may move your heart this evening to see how you might want to get involved in this area of ministry. We need you. It's a big battlefield out there. So let's get started with defining what is human trafficking. Let's look at that. What is human trafficking? Human trafficking is a modern form of slavery. It involves controlling a person through force, fraud, or coercion to exploit the victim for forced labor, sexual exploitation, or both. A modern form of slavery. The terminology force, fraud, or coercion comes from the TVPA. That stands for the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. And in order to arrest and charge someone with human trafficking, we have to have those terms, those factors at work, or that dynamic at play. Force is obvious. If someone is forcing someone to be trafficked, that's pretty obvious what that would mean. Fraud would involve misrepresentation. For example, maybe a man has a niece who lives in Orlando, Florida, and he's trying to lure her up to Flower Mound to have her work in his clothing shop, but he has ulterior motives. He wants to force her into human trafficking. Okay, that would be fraud. Okay, coercion would refer to verbal intimidation or threats, something more verbal. So we've got the physical force, we've got the misrepresentation through fraud and coercion. And when we look at human trafficking globally, the majority of human trafficking victims are actually forced labor. Okay, so the sexual exploitation can be a part of that. Sometimes it's both, but we're looking at the statistics, generally speaking, or the biggest bulk of a statistic would be the forced labor, which is going on all around us as well, even in Flower Mound. Okay. There's a difference between trafficking and smuggling. A lot of times we tend to equate those two words, but even though trafficking can kind of fit under the canopy of smuggling, trafficking doesn't have to involve the illegal transport of people or goods like smuggling does. Trafficking can occur out of a single family residence in Flower Mound. You can traffic out of a home. It doesn't necessarily mean the transport of people or goods illegally. So it's important to kind of distinguish those two terms a little bit, okay? Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. Internationally, there's 20.9 million victims of international trafficking. Again, the bulk of those would be the forced labor, but of course we'll get more into the sexual exploitation here in a minute. It's a $150 billion industry, second only to the drug industry. $150 billion industry. We have another, go ahead and push one more slide. We have another photo there. That looks like on the left we have child sex victims in India. We have child labor in Bangladesh there. And that includes also child soldiers forced to fight, forced to pick up guns in a military role. So that's what we're looking at in terms of the international statistics. Okay, we can go on to the next one. This map was compiled by the Polaris Project. They do a lot of work, phenomenal work in compiling data about human trafficking across our country. Okay, we want to talk about what's going on around the world, what's going on across the country and in our state and in our locale. This actually is tracking reports to a national hotline via calls and via text. Human trafficking reports via a hotline. So what would we observe there? We observed there that there's obviously a condensed activity where? In the urban areas, right? Yeah, along the coastline, along the major thoroughfares. This stuff is happening along Interstate 35, Interstate 20, the tollway, right here in our area as well. So yeah, we do see the condensed activity in urban areas because obviously there's more people and there's more resources. It just kind of makes sense, right? But what else do you observe about that map? Human trafficking is going on in North Dakota, in Iowa, in Utah. It's going on everywhere. It's a national epidemic. It's a national problem. Years ago, we used to think about human trafficking as only being involved, like it was like a European thing between the Western Europeans and the Eastern Europeans. We kind of, or Russians, we kind of thought of it more like that. No longer. A lot of it's going on here. And in fact, with our border patrols tightening and making it harder to come to the U.S. to get visas from other countries, we're recruiting more and more girls here locally is what's happening. So it's becoming more and more of a problem in our own backyard. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So who are the victims? What does a human trafficking victim look like? Is there a profile? Well, you may be shocked to learn that the average age of a victim is 13 years old. 13 years old. And that's very purposeful. We'll get into that in just a moment. Very purposeful at age 13. A lot of times these girls, and again, Poiema focuses on ministering to young girls and women, but there certainly is a problem with this with young men and boys as well. And I'm very thankful for the ministries that are ministering on their behalf too. But we focus on women, so I'll be talking about girls and women because that's the focus of our ministry. Many of these girls come from dysfunctional families, broken families, absentee parents. Mom's been at the casino all night. She's sleeping until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. There's nothing to eat in the house but half a box of stale Cheerios. Mom doesn't care. You know, the young girl's not doing her homework. She's not turning in reports. Mom doesn't care. Or maybe mom's not even there. Maybe mom's at the casino. Okay, so we've got the dysfunctional families in operation here. We have a history of trauma and abuse. The majority of girls and young women who find themselves involved in human trafficking have been sexually and or physically abused. The majority of them. Drug use by parents. I can't tell you how much not only is pornography fueling this industry, as Jessica will talk more about later on, but the opioid, the drug use problem. It's noon. Mom needs her fix of heroin. 10-year-old Stacy's in the house. If she sells him to Joe down the street, she'll get $50 to get that fixed and have it done by 1 o'clock. That's going on in Flower Mound, Texas. It's not just the brothel situation. We kind of think about trafficking. We think about big brothels and all of that. And that's part of it as well. But it's also what's going on down your street if somebody's got a substance abuse problem and they need money and they don't care how they get it. So that's what some of these girls face day to day. Mental illness, a lot of times there's such trauma that comes with abuse, and this trauma can start even in utero, which we'll talk about that later, but you know, when these girls were abused as girls, or, I mean, young girls, babies, I mean, you can't even imagine the trauma and the physiological effects that human trafficking has on these girls as well. And runaways. There's a huge link between human trafficking victims and foster care. Many of these girls run away from state homes or from families. Huge link between that. And when these kids run away, and they're here, let's say in the Flower Mound or the DFW area, they run to downtown Dallas to try to find out where do runaways go, where can I find some support, who do I need to hang out with, who do I need to know because I'm a runaway. Within 48 hours, they will be approached by a trafficker because they can spot them a mile away. Okay, next slide. These are some statistics. I'm going to walk you through this because they kind of take us from the national to state to local activity of what's going on. In 2014, now these stats will be a little bit higher now, but they still give us a good breakdown of what's going on in our community. There were over 466,000 missing youth across the United States in 2014. 10% of those were from Texas. 25% of those missing were from the DFW area. And the 1 in 5 of endangered runaways are probable trafficking victims. And endangered runaways are those who leave their environment. They choose to run away. A lot of times we think about human trafficking victims as like what happened in the movie Taken with Liam Neeson, where we picture this black van that comes up to a corner and snatches a girl and we never see her again. That's not the primary way that this happens. I mean, that happens, but that's not nearly as common as a young girl running away, a lot of times from a foster care system, because she's already traumatized. Obviously, she's in the foster care system because she's been abused, right? And who knows how long that's been going on, sexually and physically. So she's already traumatized. But that's the way most of these girls get involved in human trafficking. It's not by being snatched off a corner by a black van, okay? So we're looking at, what, 1,600 possible trafficking victims in the Metroplex right now. Every night in downtown Dallas, how many girls are being forced to work. And again, I already talked about the length of foster care. You see some of the statistics there with that. Okay, next slide. So who are the traffickers? What do they look like? Well, we've all seen these kind of comical images there of what a typical pimp may look like. And yeah, some of them look like that. They do. But some of them also look like this. Hit the next slide. There's a pimp for you. Shayla Williams. She befriended a young girl on social media. The girl said she was 19. She was really only 14. Shayla and her boyfriend William met this girl at a hotel in Louisville. As soon as they met her, befriended her, so to speak, got her all drugged up, full of alcohol and drugs, took pictures of her, lewd pictures of her, posted them on the internet, then took her on a 5-state tour where they used her for money, brought her back to Louisville, dumped her in a hotel, and said, see ya, and kept all that cash and ran. Thankfully, they were arrested and charged and imprisoned. So they were caught. Shayla Williams and William Jacobs. Here's another pimp. Nathan Tatarko. I think you're seeing the point we're trying to make here. They come in all different shapes and sizes and colors, don't they? Okay. Nathan Tatarko did a couple bouts or rounds of service in Afghanistan, came back, was at a mall in our area, and was driving his car by a mall, I should say. 14-year-old girl was walking in the rain, offered to give her a ride. She went in the car. After all, he's in a uniform. I mean, who would do something bad? He's a military guy. He's an older man. You know, I can trust him, right? She gets in the car. He gets her full of alcohol, has sex with her, passes her off to his friend. Pretty soon, she's at strip clubs making money for them. And then she actually got rescued because a policeman pulled over his car for a routine traffic stop. And that's how she got free. So yes, the traffickers come in all different shapes, sizes, and colors. Okay? Okay, the recruitment and grooming process. The recruitment and grooming process. You see at the hub of this wheel is power and control. That's what it's all about. You remember me talking about the average age of a victim being 13 years old? These guys, these pimps, these boyfriends are master manipulators. They know exactly what they're doing. What's a 13-year-old girl thinking about? Love, wanting to be beautiful, wanting to get her nails done, wanting to get that new outfit at the mall, right? But guess what these guys do to befriend them? They help them get their nails done. They take them to go get the new outfit. They become their boyfriends, okay? And so then it's this, they get them to bond with them, all right? And then pretty soon they get them dependent on them because you know what? Mom's not helping me get my nails done. Mom's not taking me out to Chili's for dinner 3 nights a week. So, whoa, wow, he must really, and oh, by the way, he's also telling her how much he loves her, okay? So she's just bonding with him. She's in love. She wants to get married and all of that, and he's just working her like crazy. And then he isolates her from her family and friends. Let me introduce you to new family and friends. See, it's a whole process of recruitment. Then he'll turn on her. And like he might say something like, you know, money's getting kind of tight. You know, John and his girlfriend Ashley just broke up. And John, you know, he's really kind of hurting. Can you just go over there and help him out sexually and all that? Just do it for me. What is she going to do? She's 13. Sure, I'll do it for you. You see? And then once he gets her to do it one time, it's that much easier the next time, and the next time, and the next time. So what happens after that? You've got coercion and threats. You better do it again, or else I'm going to leave you, or I'm going to beat you, or I'm going to bring so-and-so over and we're going to rape you. I mean, it gets much more vile and violent as the circle of grooming continues. Of course, the sexual violence. So power and control is at the hub of this. And a lot of these girls, even physiologically, the prefrontal cortex has not been fully developed at age 13. That's where the decision making takes place. Or in other words, if you and I had someone tell us, well, if you don't do this, okay, I'm going to go kill your little brother or sister. We're like, what? I'm going to go to my parents, I'm going to go to the local law enforcement, I'm going to call the FBI, or whatever. She's 13. All she's thinking is, he's going to kill my little brother or sister. Well, I better do what he says. You see, they don't think like we do. They haven't even been, that prefrontal cortex hasn't been fully developed. Add traumatization on top of that, okay? You've got a young girl who's all messed up, who can't think clearly. She's a child, after all. Okay. Before we get into this, I want to talk about some of the signs, how to recognize some of these victims. I don't have a slide for this, but it's important for you to know that. In our information in the back, we also have descriptions of some of the things to look for with some of these girls. Tattoos. Certain kinds of tattoos. A lot of times these boyfriends become daddy to the girl, and a dysfunctional family system kind of gets started. Where you've got like a hierarchy of girls in the family, you've got daddy, there's one who's kind of more like a motherly type of role. I mean, it's just like a dysfunctional, twisted, satanic family. Totally contrast what God has ordained in such a sacred way, but now it's been twisted through this. They might have daddy as a tattoo, maybe a dollar sign of some sort, a barcode on them. Doesn't that just break your heart? A barcode? Is anything more demeaning than that? You're just a piece of property to make money. A barcode. Sometimes crowns are associated with human trafficking. Crowns on them. Just be on the lookout for those. A lot of times the girls look very malnourished. They're not dressed appropriately for the season. In other words, if it's cold outside, they're dressed kind of flimsily in kind of an odd way. Burns or scars on them from abuse, from physical abuse. Sometimes they appear kind of listless or withdrawn, depressed, oppressed. They can even, you find that maybe if it's a girl, maybe down your street, or you suspect something's going on in your neighborhood where, you know, maybe they're gone a lot, they travel a lot, and there's very inconsistent stories as to where have you been, or who did you go see, and you're hearing different things from different people. lot of kind of questionable things going on, so be on the lookout for that. So those are some of the signs, but what's very odd, you'll see up there, are that trauma bonds form, and you're thinking, what? You know, when this guy turns on them, how can they not want to eagerly turn him in? Again, we're talking about children here, largely, okay? And the deal is that they're so identified with their pimp, with their daddy, that he's been telling them where to go, what to do, why to do it, where to do it, who to do it with. That's the whole identity. So they don't know how to function independently of that situation, as dysfunctional as it is. Okay, but that's what they identify with. They tend a lot of times to return to their trafficker because that's just what they're used to. Okay, they'll refuse help many times. That's another sign of trauma bonds. It's inconceivable to us, but for them, they'll go back to the trafficker sometimes up to 7 times it takes to break that bond. They have very disjointed memories. They remember getting the nails done. They tend not to think about getting beaten that night for not bringing in enough money. And by the way, don't think these girls get to hang on to, you know, half the money, 50% or whatever. No, he takes 99.9% of it. He just may feed her. And he won't feed her if she doesn't come back with a certain amount of money each night. In other words, don't come back unless you've made $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. I think this, to me, is one of the most gut-wrenching things about this whole sad, broken world, is that we're not talking about these girls with guys 2 times a night or 3 times a night. We're talking 10, 15, 20 guys a night before they can even come home. Before they can even return to daddy if they don't have that money. No food, no place to sleep. I mean, it is so vile and broken and just gut-wrenching. Yeah. A lot of times they'll act aggressively because there's anger, there's frustration. I mean, their psyches are just in chaos. And they want to protect their pimp. Kind of like that whole Stockholm Syndrome thing. You've heard about that, where people will be kidnapped, and if they're not totally debilitated or violently harmed by their offender, they'll kind of end up bonding with them in an odd way. So it's very similar, kind of like a Stockholm Syndrome effect that we see with these young girls. Okay. Yes, there's different types of trauma. As I talked about, developmental trauma is actually due to chronic violence. In other words, nonstop, continual violence that can actually happen in utero. Before they're even born, there can be a traumatization that begins, and then once they're born and they're in these very, very difficult, tragic circumstances, sometimes it can only take one thing. Shock trauma occurs. And then they have to struggle with the different physiological issues, and then how all of this affects the nervous system when they've been traumatized. So I think, again, being part of the body of Christ, being a church, I think that we can recognize that. I think what draws me to this ministry so much is that I can think of few things in life where the enemy can cut just a swath of devastation across an entire person. I mean, he can damage you physically, spiritually, emotionally, physiologically, and he can just destroy the whole person. That's why it's so necessary for you to be sensitive to God calling you to be used by him in this ministry, to put the broken pieces back together again, to be part of his redemptive work. And that's what this is all about. That's why we're here. That's why you're here, because God wants to use us to be a part of the light, to bring light into these situations, and redemptive endings. It doesn't have to be sad endings. Okay. And some of that dysregulation to the nervous system can result in 2 things. We're looking at hyperarousal and hypoarousal. Kind of the hyperarousal, you can look at the different descriptions there. But basically, these are the fighters. These are the girls that are still in it to fight. They're survivors. And some of these trafficking victims are like that. They hate their life, but they're fighters. I'm going to survive no matter what. Where I'm more concerned about is the hypoarousal girls. They're the ones who've given up. They're the ones with more of the suicidal tendencies. They're just hopeless. And man, if anybody needs us with the hope of Jesus Christ, it's those girls. Because they are hopeless. He is our hope. Okay. Basically, in the DFW area, the commercial sex industry generates almost $100 million in the DFW area. Almost $100 million. And what do the pimps look like? They can also be 68-year-old women. Hortensia Medelis made $1.6 million in a year and a half, tax-free, out of a cantina in San Antonio. So don't think that the pimps only look like the proverbial stereotype. They come in all shapes and sizes. Okay? And so do the Johns. They come in all shapes and sizes. These were some men arrested in a sting online. But you know what? We can't thumbprint these guys in terms of they're white, they're black, they're Hispanic, they're young, they're old. They come from all socioeconomic groups. Okay? And of course, online pornography is fueling a lot of this, and some of those, the social media and some of the connecting that goes on through that. Thankfully, there's being more work done by law enforcement to go after the Johns, to help curb demand, to put fear in them. But we know that through the message of Jesus Christ, we can change hearts and lives to keep them from doing this as well. Because I think a lot of these men don't realize the severe traumatization they're bringing to these young girls. We got to get that message out there too, how this is affecting these girls. Okay? And lastly, what can you do? We've talked about some of the signs of girls that are being trafficked. Hopefully you're understanding that this is something that's not going on just in the big cities, but it's going on in our own neighborhoods. And what is God calling you to do? He's calling you to be aware of what's going on, to report things that look suspicious, and to pray. Pray that God will be at work through ministries like Poiema and through Jessica's ministry here to squash this and to bring healing to these women, because he can certainly do that through the power of Jesus Christ. So, thank you.